everyone. David Rose here with USXP. Welcome to the Scaling Stateside podcast, along with my co-host, Matt Oxley. We are on a mission to help founders better understand the U.S. expansion journey and the U.S. venture fundraising journey, the pitfalls and successes, and basically better prepare them for the U.S. expansion journey ahead of them. We are having conversations with founders who've already made the journey and with venture capital firms and specifically partners who are funding U.S. expansion for the portfolio companies. And today, we're very pleased to have with us Luke Pappas from NEA. Luke, please introduce yourself and let us know where in the world you are today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So my name is Luke Pappas. I'm a partner with NEA on our technology investing practice. I'm originally from California. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and actually my hometown is Sacramento. So a lot of my friends still follow the NBA. I still follow it here in the UK, and I'm a Sacramento Kings fan, which has been a challenging last 20 years. But
sorry about that.
The early days of Chris Webber and Mike Bibby and all those guys. So when I was 3 or 4 years old, we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's where I grew up. And for the first almost 30 years of my life, like you could draw a 40-mile radius circle around San Francisco, and all of my life was in that circle, more or less, until about 3 years ago when I moved. I've been with NEA now for a little over 8 years. About 3 years ago, Scott Sandell, who is the chairman of NEA and leads our investment committee and has been NEA's leader for a decade plus now. He called me. We had been investing more and more in the European market, and I had been covering several of our investments. And one of our close partnerships with a fund called Speed Invest, which is a pan-European seed fund. And so coming out of COVID, actually, I did our first real trip for like a business trip for the firm. And I was covering a lot of our European investments. We hadn't seen them in 2 or 3 years, roughly 2 years. And so I came back and I was giving a report in our all hands meeting. And I started getting messages from a lot of our general partners asking if I would ever consider relocating. And then Scott called me, and I think the firm had been considering opening an office in London for several years. And it was at a point in my career where it made sense to try and take on a bit more responsibility in the firm. And I was excited to have the opportunity and grateful that Scott and the rest of the partnership thought about me to move over. So I've been living now in London, between London and San Francisco. So I still cover a number of our companies in the Bay Area, and my family's there. And I still have a lot of my life in the Bay Area and more broadly across the United States. So I travel back maybe 10, 12 times a year and still spend a good amount of time in the Bay Area. But I am mostly based in London covering our European investing practice.
And Luke, one thing we like to hear about is where you got your start career-wise. And we mean early start. What was your first paying job?
I think, first, like if you could consider it a job, I did a lot of work for with my dad and my brother and our uncles and just extended family in the Bay Area, working a lot of construction jobs, carrying
that's
bags.
Work. That's work.
Early days, like you can't really swing a hammer, but you can carry the tools to and from the job site, and you get to learn from, your family in one of the trades. So I spent, it was a lot of good family time doing that. But I think my first official paid job was lifeguarding the Sleepy Hollow community swimming pool. So
a little bit easier than construction.
Yeah, a little bit more relaxed. Although you do need to be attentive. I remember there was I never made any official saves, but there was this little kid who was running on the pool deck, and you're supposed to, make sure no one's running. But the thing was, he stopped running, and then he put this little inflatable. It was like a rubber circle disc thing that would sink in the pool, and he put it around his legs and then tried to jump in. I grabbed him by the hand before he could get in the water, but I think that would have been technically, if he was in the water, a safe. But luckily, I think in lifeguarding, you always want to stop the problem before it happens. So luckily, we were able to keep him out of the water.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, if I may, I'm just doing some kind of background reading on you. You went from playing baseball at Stanford, and then you kind of went into Morgan Stanley world, and then became a founder yourself, and then moved on to VC. So what I'd love, and the real interesting, and what we try and do at Scaling Stateside, is really understand people's journeys. And then yours is of particular interest because you're obviously a founder that's gone to the venture side of it. So could you just kind of explain that kind of that chapter, that period?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, first of all, I owe my parents a huge thanks for giving me the opportunity to study at Stanford. I wasn't a recruited player. I walked onto the baseball team. And my dad actually was the one who inspired me to continue to play. He was my coach growing up. He played competitively when he was younger, and it was a sport that we shared a lot of love for, and he coached me growing up. And then, high school, you play for your school, and then I had been recruited to a few other places, but Stanford was always the place. Growing up in the Bay Area, you see the best of athletics and the best of academics. And my mom was never a huge fan of baseball. She's actually from Belgium. So we grew up, with a lot of our family in Belgium. We would visit them every summer. But I remember when I made the baseball team, she bought an encyclopedia of baseball and just started reading it like cover to cover. And for me, that was like the opportunity to study and play at a university like Stanford was incredibly motivating, first of all. And I felt a lot of gratitude to the people that got me there. So it lit a lot of fire within me. And I didn't have a lot of time playing on the field, but for me, it was the relationships, the teammates that I, became some of my closest friends, the coaches who became, life mentors for me, not just in baseball, but off the field as well. People who I still feel very grateful to have a chance to call up, if I have a question about something, and who are checking in on me in my life as now that I've graduated. But Stanford was really, I didn't really know much about computing until honestly, my freshman year. All the baseball players, because we travel so much for the regular season schedule, if you have a road series, it's 3 games and you have 1 travel day. So more than half the week you're away from your university. So we try and load up a lot of the graduation requirements outside of that spring semester, and the classes you can take that are recorded, you try and take those in the spring when you're traveling because you can watch the lectures. So all of our freshman class took CSA, which is the Intro to Computer Science programming class, our freshman year. And for me, that was the first time I would type in a Word document, but I didn't really understand at all how applications were run by the operating system, how computer resources were managed, all these types of things. And fortunately for me, I sat in that class and everything just sort of clicked. It just made a lot of the logical, sort of rationale of computer programming, the deterministic nature of it. In my brain, it just made a lot of sense. And so I decided to major in computer science, and I picked up a second major as well, doing something called MS&E, which is like a finance degree at Stanford. And in my senior year, we were traveling a lot, and I had saved a few of the harder classes for my last semester or last quarter. And, office hours are a challenging time where you might go and there might be 200 or 300 people in front of you waiting to get helped. And if you're waiting to, you have an hour before your flight leaves to go play, Florida State or play any of these, big name schools we were competing against back in the days, your time is limited. So, and we didn't have a digital system. It was like you show up, there was a whiteboard, you see a list of names, and that's how, if you're at the bottom of the list, you have to wait until you're at the top. So I felt like we should just turn that whiteboard into a digital product. And so a good friend of mine, Michael Fitzpatrick, who was fellow CS, he was actually majoring he was pursuing a master's at the time in computer science. He and I had shared a few classes before. We decided to build a digital version of that whiteboard and called it QStatus. And then we were lucky to have the sponsorship of a few professors at Stanford who rolled it out in their classes. And then it just sort of had this viral, once a TA for one course used it in their course, they would tell other friends, hey, you should use this for all the students are talking. And so then, after a couple of weeks, most of the computer science department at Stanford was using QStatus. And then, other universities started picking it up. And we thought about, hey, can we sell this to barbershops? Can we sell this to, to-go restaurants, that kind of thing? And honestly, the use case of office hours was the best use case for that. And so we didn't make much progress outside of but it's still used today. I mean, I'll log on and I'll see some of the old classes that I would take at Stanford and see live queues and see students getting helped. And it's actually also been very helpful for us on the recruiting side now, being on the investing part of the world as we help our companies recruit engineers. Oftentimes there's great engineers out of Stanford and I'll have a chat with them and they'll say, oh, you built QStatus. And it's sort of this nice moment where people can connect and I think people who have been through that journey of building a product connecting with users, thinking about different business models. There's a lot of empathy involved. So it's a nice point of connection for me now. But from that, we didn't scale QStatus commercially. So it wasn't a commercial success, but I think it's made a nice impact for the efficiency of the education, kind of journey of a student in a university. So that's been nice to have. But after graduating, I had the chance to join Morgan Stanley, and I worked for Michael Grimes and a number of the other, tech bankers at the Morgan Stanley tech banking practice on the West Coast. And that was a period of time where, we were in the office 20 plus hours a day. People talk about investment banking, and there's this 996 culture in venture that people talk about within entrepreneurship. But investment banking and any services job, I think it kind of comes down to how much time are you able to give to your clients. And working for a group like the Morgan Stanley Tech Group, led by Michael, we were always putting our clients, before almost every other part of our lives. And so I learned a tremendous amount. I didn't have a finance background. We did more MS&E at Stanford, but it was much more focused on entrepreneurship, not maybe the type of math you're doing when you're advising on an IPO or a multi-billion-dollar M&A. So I had to learn quickly. And luckily I had someone who's now one of my best friends, a guy named Yao Wang, who was sitting next to me on the analyst desk. And first couple of weeks, he did most of my assignments, actually. And he carried his own load and mine as I was learning a lot of the technical complexities of financial modeling and things like this. I look back on those 2 years, and people that we were, our analyst class, we all talk still today. People have gone on to work in hedge funds, other venture firms, private equity firms. It's an amazing network. I was lucky to be the analyst on the Snapchat IPO. So we spent more than 12 months modeling that company's financials. We did 3 different roadshows, meeting investors around the world. And for me, that was one of the defining, if I look back and how I ultimately got to venture, I had some of the company and product building experience from QStatus, but I didn't have much of a network in venture. But having gone through that process of working with one of, at the time, probably the largest privately invested company, you had Snap, you had Uber, and a number of others. But working in a company of that profile with so many people in venture who had invested in that company at the time, NEA was a shareholder. And so that was a connection to the firm. And then I also have, as I think back to the people who I owe a lot of gratitude to, there was someone who's been a mentor of mine. She was 1 year ahead of me. She did computer science and MS&E, and I sort of followed her footsteps. And then she went to investment banking, and I followed her example again, a woman named Julia Schottenstein, and she's now leading commercial and business for Langchain. But she was at NEA at the time, and so she recruited me to the firm. And I had met several of the partners through the Snap IPO, so there were a lot of good touch points. And things just I was lucky to have a chance to interview and lucky to be offered a position. And I look back, and it's been a little over 8 years now, and it's incredible how quickly things have gone and how many different components of our I feel like the venture job I've had a chance to contribute to within the firm. But that's how I would those are all the kind of the different inflection points that led me to where I am now.
That's awesome. And I think for me personally, it's always so exciting kind of seeing that journey take shape. And the thing that I'm interested to now kind of, I think, unpack a little bit further is you mentioned when you spoke to Scott and he said to you, right, okay, go and open up the UK, go and open up EMEA. I mean, how much time had you spent in the UK prior to that? What was your first kind of thought when that opportunity kind of came up? And then I'll ask you about your kind of first kind of 90 days on the ground after that.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, to be honest with you, I had having my mother's side of the family like in Belgium, and we grew up, with American culture and then Belgian culture as well. So while I lived and our family was always based in the Bay Area, I did feel like I had more of international exposure than someone who just was born and raised in the US and, kind of full stop. So it wasn't totally different for me. And I had also I'd done several trips for the firm before that one I had mentioned earlier, visiting a number of our other companies. But I had never considered living outside of California, to be honest. I consider myself a Californian. I love the culture, living by the coast, beautiful sunny days, hiking, surfing, all that activity. And
now you're in London.
Yeah, and London is a little bit different. I don't consider myself a big city person. Right. But if you think about cities, I mean, nature, what let's hope is going to be there for as long as we have humans on Earth and we can take care of it and preserve it. Cities, though, are really human built. And so, you can go live in the mountains, you can go live by the coastline and be in nature. And that's where I feel at home and feel very comfortable. But having a chance to experience a city like London or a city like New York or a city like Hong Kong, these places, parts of the world that are massive cultural centers, but are built by humans and built for humans, like to participate in that is a very, very unique thing. And so I feel very grateful. When Scott called me, I wasn't initially, I felt a lot of gratitude to be considered. But I also, it wasn't something that I was really planning for or had thought about before. So it took me some time to think through. I mean, it's a big life decision to move to a different part of the world, cross the Atlantic, 8-hour time zone difference to California. But again, NEA, I've, over my 8 years, there's certain things I can look back on. And the part of why I think this firm is special comes back to culture. I think, Scott and the rest of the leadership consider this firm a family more than a business in many ways. And Scott told me, he's like, you have to think about this. It has to feel good for you and your family first. We think you'd be the right fit for the firm, and it would be helpful for us. You have to also, we're not going to put pressure on you. And so he gave me several months to think through it. This was, our initial first call was in, November of 2021. And then I did 2 trips to London in January and February. And I told myself, if I can survive these months, which feel like the bleakest months in London, then I'll be okay. And, but to be honest with you, the excitement of the city, and also I think more broadly, the excitement of the entrepreneurial market in the UK and more broadly across the EU, I think is really, really compelling. And that also was exciting to me to ultimately move over. So
can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I've read a couple of quotes of yours where you believe that the EU/UK market at the moment reminds you of the US in 2010 era. Do you still think that? Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if you look at the U.S. market for entrepreneurship, I mean, NEA has been investing for almost 50 years. The very start of Silicon Valley and first wave of companies that came out of that, looking at Fairchild Semiconductor and the Rebellious 8 and all those companies that came out, in the chip world and the age of internet switches and routers. I mean, NEA was one of the firms that was backing those founding companies. So I wasn't investing back then, and I didn't participate in a lot of this, but through the history of our firm and all the stories that have been told, you can look at sort of some of the pattern recognition as things have progressed. And I think in the U.S., we've now lived through almost 5 different generations of companies that have started, exited. Some of them have endured and are still, making a mark in the world today. And there's also a culture where, movies like The Social Network celebrate the founding story of a company like Facebook or now Meta. You have all these different shows and movies about Apple Computer. And I think founders in the U.S. are celebrated, and their status is almost on par with, or maybe in some circles exceeds people who are, film stars or sports stars, things like this. I don't know if that culture was the same level of celebration in Europe as it was in the U.S., but I think that's shifting. I think you have now all the ingredients that you look and you can say, can we build a category-defining, globally operating company that's headquartered in a European city or a European country? And to me, the answer to that question is yes. And I think about 2010 is when that started to shift. You had companies like Spotify and Adyen and a number of other very large companies today that broke through that sort of ice in the lake or whatever metaphor you want to use. And they proved that if you take a chance on a technology, it's not like you're foregoing a role in medicine or law. And those are amazing fields important to our world. But I think, I've looked at my own family, and when we were talking about venture capital, some of my relatives in Belgium, they didn't understand what the market was or what the job entailed. And it seems a little bit risky. You're investing in a company that has 10 employees and is loss making. To the rational brain, if you don't have a lot of examples of success there, it can seem like a category that is risky. And you can ask yourself, why would you, if you're well educated, if you have, certain skills, why would you take the perception of increased risk when maybe the return isn't as apparent? But some of those early companies showed what's possible. And I think that unlocked the talent layer in Europe to say, yes, we will join a seed stage company or a Series A company over, a very nice salary at an established bank or an established law firm or, any other field. And that was a really important sort of defining moment, I think. And I think about 2010 is when that started to shift. And now I think you also have enough companies that have scaled. They've gone from seed through either an M&A or an IPO or are large late stage private companies. And they have been able to hire, that first wave of companies, that generation, you had to hire people from the US, and they would either stay in the US or they would move their families here. But that skill set came from companies that were being built in the US. But now the VPs of engineering, the VPs of finance from those first generation of companies, they learn from that cohort of talent that moved here or that joined those later stage companies, and they can become the leaders in this next wave of companies. So to me, you have on the talent side and culture side, like I think that you look at Spotify. Netflix has several shows now telling the story of Spotify, and it's celebrated. It's part of the reason why I think Stockholm in particular and Sweden more broadly is an amazing place for startups today. You have a number of other companies that I think are being celebrated across Europe, and the founder journey is being celebrated. That's an amazing thing. The talent now, I think, is leaning in on startups. And the third leg of the stool is capital. And if you look at NEA, we're a very large institutional investor, and we have a number of different resources that I think are very helpful to companies as they grow and scale. Several of our peers have similar practices, and with funds on the order of our size, multi-billion-dollar funds, having that access to that capital for European companies is now also available. I think Europe had an amazing seed network. If you look at all the different firms, I mentioned Speedinvest, but there's probably 20 other firms. Pick any city you want in Europe, and there's 2 or 3 that are amazing, partners to companies. That capital has helped launch companies. But to scale on a global level, you need to be able to raise your Series C or your Series D. Companies like Synthesia and 11 Labs, in our portfolio that have gone on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. That wasn't as easy 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. But now I think you have several large US-based firms that have full-time offices here in Europe. You have increasingly larger European-based firms who are raising larger and larger funds. And I think the LP base across Europe, because there's a lot of attractive talent and attractive capital that hasn't invested as much in venture, but is seeing the returns now and is seeing the impact to our both personal and professional lives that technology can play. And I think that's also going to start investing in either directly into companies or into VC firms who then allocate into private companies. So I think you have all 3 ingredients now to grow and build companies on a global scale, but that are based here in Europe.
And just a final kind of question from me on the culture, because one of the things that we do, obviously, we support UK/European founders on that journey over to the US. What are the main cultural differences in an entrepreneur's mindset have you experienced coming from the US and obviously now operating in the UK?
So one of the first things that I say that I've recognized, and I had to adjust myself a little bit to this, because growing up in my first 5 years of my career in the US, you're used to a certain style of pitch. I think American founders tend to be much more commercial. And when I say commercial, there is the not so much here's how we're going to make money out of this product, but here's how we're going to present the next 5 or 10 year roadmap. I think European founders tend to be more understated. It's more of a focus on the next 6 to 12 to 18 months. Here are our tactical things we're going to do. And if you're in a 30-minute pitch and 20 minutes of it is talking about we're going to make this specific hire, we're going to do, these 3 accounts, that's good level of detail, but you lose the opportunity to paint the big picture. And for a multi-billion-dollar fund, I had to learn this when I joined the firm. I was hearing a lot of these pitches, and I think, this is an amazing company. They can, raise one more round, then it'll probably scale to 100, 200 million of revenue, and then exit. And I would, bring this into our partner meetings, and the feedback was, that's a great company, but it's not a fit for our fund size, because we need to think on the order of multi-billions and how we return funds of our size. It's not going to be a 100 or 200 million dollar company. It needs to be a billion plus company. And so communicating that in a pitch is a different stylistic, sort of storytelling ability. And I think it's much more common in the US. The US, I think, is a much more commercial place. People are advertising for everything. You grow up in that culture. It's sort of second nature. I don't find the European culture to be as commercial in that way as American culture is. And so I think it's something that European founders have to learn, but also American investors who are spending more time in Europe need to adapt what they're looking for in a pitch, because you could miss a great company if you're not listening for the right details, or if you're tuning out, if you're not hearing what you're expecting to hear. So that was a bit of an adjustment. But I will also say some of the best companies that are coming out of Europe, founders have that commercial ability in full scale. I look at a company like Sauna Labs in our portfolio, and we're so lucky to partner with Joel Hellermark, who I think has, when we look at founders, technical ability, product sense, and then commercial ability, and the ability to be a great storyteller. That's a very rare combination. Oftentimes, you find that in multiple people in a company who collectively can carry that workload. Joel had it in just one person, and he was 10 out of 10 in all those categories. So very rare mix, but that's the type of founder that we look for point blank across the firm. This is not just in Europe or in the US, but we have one global investment committee, and that's the bar we have. And my point of bringing up this story is that those profiles, even though it maybe isn't as common yet, they definitely exist. But that's the example that I think founders of today will look to say, okay, if I'm pitching an American VC, this style is maybe what they're expecting. So that was a bit of an adjustment. The other thing, I think, in the US is a massive country. We have, you go state by state, and maybe some of the culture shifts a little bit. California to Texas is a lot different than, maybe Minnesota and then New York. These are all different, but at the same time, same federal policy that applies, the same language largely. So doing business across states, fairly easy. Doing business across borders in Europe, a little bit more challenging. Hiring people, if you're a Nordic-based company, hiring somebody in the UK, hiring somebody in Spain, like different language, different treatment of stock options, maybe different, some holidays are different. So it is a little bit of there is an adjustment, I think, that European companies have to go through as well on like just, everyday life, sort of part of the company building process. But what I would say is, I think where Europe has an advantage, back to the fact that it's, I would say it's breaking out now. I think there is a different energy for European companies right now. As I look at the, best-in-class companies they all have their unique cultures, and that's not a comment on that level of company. But I think, there's a lot of stories coming out of Silicon Valley now of engineers working multiple different companies, having jobs 3 or 4, and the companies don't know this, but people know now how to, if I'm a remote engineer, if I'm a remote product person, or, I can go in the office 1 or 2 days a week and then join this company. And the culture, when that happens, is not as consistent. There's not as much of a team first attitude. I think in Europe, there's a freshness to it where it's like, we want to be the first company in this city or in this category, and put our country, put our community on the map, so to speak. And that permeates across all the people that are joining these companies. And so I think that is actually an advantage in terms of company culture that European startups have, because to be the 5th or 6th company in a market is an amazing outcome, but not the same level of excitement as if, hey, we're going to be the first ones, the trailblazers, or carry the torch for the last generation. And that, I think, is a little extra motivation. So that's the last thing I would comment on.
Luke, let's talk a little bit about investment thesis. I think a lot of, especially first-time founders, don't really appreciate the importance of that concept. And they might think, hey, you're a venture capital firm, you invest in startups. I'm a startup, I need capital, I'm going to come pitch you. Can you kind of talk to how NEA thinks about investment thesis, and then kind of trickle that down to how you think about it? Like, what does a perfect deal for you look like?
It's hard to say. Every deal is unique. There are a handful of things I think we put more weight into, and this is probably true for a number of our peer firms as well. I mentioned Joel and the founder profile that we look for. I think if you find a truly exceptional entrepreneur, whether that's at the seed stage, where I think it matters probably more, because the level of upside at the seed stage, there's less data points, but you're investing a lot earlier, so your cost basis is lower. So we put a lot of weight into the founder profile, who we are investing into, and what their motivations are, what the mission of the company is, as like the number one thing that we evaluate. I think at the seed stage, it's really the majority of what you're investing in, because there generally isn't very well built out product. There's not a lot of data at that time. If you're investing later, we still put a lot of emphasis into the team, but we also have other data points that we can evaluate. We can look at the competitive landscape. usage across different products. We can look at your year-on-year growth rate. We can look at some of your core KPIs. I come back to things people often ask about how much revenue or ARR they should show to raise a Series A or to raise a Series B. Those are important metrics for some companies and in some categories, especially if you're a classic enterprise software company. But what I think is actually a better indicator is just usage. Look at how many people in a company, even if you're an enterprise software company, how many people are using the product? Is that usage increasing every day? Because if you see usage, you can eventually figure out a way to monetize that usage. Because if you have someone who's using your tool, that means they're getting value out of it. And so whether you're capturing that value today or you'll capture it in the future, that's one of the values, I think, of raising venture capital, is because it allows you to go several years, maybe without having to focus on running a company to a profitable state. Long term, all of the businesses we invest, we believe, will become profitable, cash-generating companies. But sometimes in the short term, either you have to invest in technology, and that can be a loss-making several years, or you want to get your technology in the hands of users, collect as much feedback as possible, build up a lot of affinity to a certain product, and then over time figure out natural ways to share in that value creation with your customer base. And so I look at our firm, and then I've been trained in the NEA investment model, so I consider these things also how I look at companies. But we put a tremendous amount of weight in the team, and specifically the founders who are, when you're starting a company, you have it in your head, but the ability to recruit people to your company, the ability to win early customers, and ultimately communicate a vision for a product and then materialize that through engineering. Those are very, very hard challenges, and that all comes from the founding team. So that's where we put a lot of our weight into. And then we evaluate the size of the market, the size of the opportunity. How much is this product different versus the rest of the, either you're building a new category or you're going to displace existing spend or existing usage. So how do you think about communicating that to the people you're ultimately going to serve? Those are the things that we put a lot of weight into.
Are there sectors that you specifically focus on or sectors that you specifically avoid?
One of the unique things about NEA is that we have been one of the largest and most diversified investors in venture. It's part of the value prop that we offer to our limited partners. So we raise multi-billion-dollar funds, and then we invest that across many different sectors. And if you look at just the way our team is structured, we have a dedicated technology investing team and a dedicated healthcare investing team. And so, we have one global IC for each of those different groups. We have our healthcare IC and we have our tech IC. That allows us to invest in, many different categories, not just tech, not just healthcare, and go deep in those areas. So what we look for are markets that can produce billion-dollar plus companies, $10 billion plus companies. There are certain things that, over the history of the firm and in our, what we tell our limited partners that we will avoid. There are certain categories that we just don't feel like we have a lot of expertise in, certain, substances and things that might be addictive. We've stayed away from those categories. But if it's classic software, if it's classic healthcare services, biopharma, consumer categories, we've done a number of things in the e-commerce space. For example, fintech is a huge area of focus for our firm. These are all areas, I think, and if you look at our team, a lot of different backgrounds that allows us to have people who are experts in a given field and lead investments in those areas with high conviction. It's part of, again, why I think we have a very unique investing practice. And that comes back to the people who are making the investment decisions. And I have a tremendous amount of trust in, sitting in our investment committees. There's a lot of times I'll hear a company and I'll have very little idea about what the commercial application is, who the customers ultimately are, because it's in a category that I've spent very little time covering. But that's where I think having the trust within a partnership is a very important thing. And many of our investments that we've made that have generated great returns for the firm have come from places where, one or two people had a lot of conviction in, but it wasn't a category that was maybe always that kind of globally well known within the firm or even more broadly across venture capital.
Luke, how do you source deals? I know here in the U.S., NEA is a great brand. So I think if I was raising right now, almost certainly NEA is going to be in the top, list of firms I'm going to contact as a proactive outreach. You're sitting in the UK. Do you get the benefit of that great brand and inbounds, or how are you personally sourcing deals?
Yeah, it's one of the things Philippe Chopin, who we work together in growing our European practice here. He and I talk about this a lot. We have really, we feel very fortunate to have the history of the firm behind us. I mean, it's not like we're starting from square zero in building out this practice. We have the history of our firm, many of the investments that we've made in the US that are well recognized in Europe. And when we opened the office, we had, I think, 20 plus companies that already existed, in the European market. So we weren't building from scratch. At the same time, we weren't here full time until we moved over. So there was an element of just getting in front of all the local investors and entrepreneurs and communicating, hey, we're committed to being here. We have, we're growing our team. I've moved here. We're in the same time zone. We're committing resources. And because founders care about that, like you don't want to raise money from someone who's just going to be flying in or out or, isn't going to be with you at the same time zone, or a firm that isn't committed to being somewhere long term. Having that kind of change across your board, let's say you're 2 or 3 years into building a company, that can be very disruptive. And so it's one of the things that's unique, I think, also about NEA, the longevity of people, the time people stay within a firm. And we have this approach, we say crawl, walk, run, where we're very deliberate about our actions, and we're not going to, all of a sudden scale up really quickly and then scale down really quickly. Sometimes you need to, we move quickly with markets, but we don't make the commitment to a place and then decide to pull out, after 1 or 2 years. So we're here for the long haul for sure. And I think that really matters to the local, investor and founder community. In terms of sourcing though, I think the last 2 to 3 years, we've spent a lot of time trying to communicate to, again, the local seed networks in some of the best and proven markets across Europe that we do have our office here. This is our investment focus. These are the kind of companies that we're looking to invest in. And we also spent a lot of time trying to build that first sort of foundational layer of new investments once we opened the office. And I think looking back now over the last 3 years, we've put a lot of that foundation in place. I think we feel very fortunate to have gotten to know several of the leading GPs of top seed funds across Europe who have been very helpful to us in how to think through shaping our practice here, how to be helpful to founders here, and then also just ideating on different investment categories. And then we also are fortunate to partner with some of the, I think, best-in-class companies and best-in-class founders. You look at Sana Labs and Joel, Synthesia, with Victor and Stefan, 11 Labs and everything that Mati's building there, and a number of other companies. These tend to be some of our best references and ways in which we can win that next great deal. And so we feel very fortunate to have that foundation in place. But that's oftentimes where the best deals come from. Founders will communicate to, they all see the potential in the next great founder, and then they'll refer that founder to a given firm, or an early seed investor who sees a company in a place that maybe people weren't looking before, but they backed that first company. And then, in 3 or 4 months of investing, they see the performance and they send us a message on WhatsApp or a call and they say, hey, you should go meet this company. And we'll get on a plane, the next day or even same day, fly out and try and meet that company because the pace of deal flow now is incredibly fast. But that tends to be, I think, the network piece is where, because every venture firm, we're all tracking the same things. People are all doing the same data practices, looking at, different, there's places you can find unique signal, but the period of time that signal stays unique for is very, very short, I think now, because with the speed at which people can find different data sources and then get, insights out of that data. But what I think is differentiated is the relationships piece. And that's where, your reputation in the market, your founder references, and your relationships with early investors really matter. And we've been spending a lot of time trying to build out a lot of trust at that layer.
Just a quick question from me. As we inferred earlier, one of the things that we really like to do is kind of talk about the human side of it as well. So I think there's a couple of questions I have for you around how did you find going from the US to the UK? What was that like? What blew your mind? What did you have to learn? But then I think the follow-on question is, what guidance would you give any European founder looking to make that journey over to the US? Yeah.
First part, I have a love for a TV show called Ted Lasso. And I was lucky because Ted Lasso was sort of season 1, 2, and 3 were unfolding as I was moving over. And that show is basically an American football coach who moves over and coaches Richmond FC, and he's kind of like fish out of water, but like there was the good humor and, things about the different culture clashes. And I feel like I was living Ted's experience sometimes as I was adjusting to the culture here. One thing that was, I think for me was surprising. London is a very British city, but at the same time, it's so international. And I've met people from all over the world. It's been an amazing experience, but I feel very lucky to have met people who have similar, they were living in a part of the world that was not their home initially. And so that's a point of connection with people. I also was very lucky, someone I consider a very close friend, Peter Specht at Creandum. He and I were actually flatmates for a year. And so we both moved to London at the same time, he for Creandum and me for NEA, and we were opening our offices respectively for each of our firms. We actually now have offices like 4 buildings from each other. It's his birthday today too, so shout out to Peter on his birthday. But he was an amazing, not just professionally, but as a friend, introducing me to all of his friends here in Europe. And some of those people have become some of my closest friends now. And I think that's I think back to when I was at, back in college, and I think I mentioned some of the coaches that I played for and how they were mentors in a way. And I played for 2 coaches who are, top 3 wins of all time in college baseball. And when they each retired, they were, I remember them getting asked questions about, what is the best win you ever had? Or what was your favorite memory? And it wasn't never about a specific win or a specific outcome. It was about the players they coached and the coaches that they coached with and the relationships they built over 40 plus years of, building a program like Stanford baseball, and then, seeing all the players that come through and then the careers that they would have on the back half of their playing days. And that really stuck with me. And I think that's what I think is true adventure as well. And finding people like Peter who can introduce you to people and are just good quality humans who are for me, I don't think I would have had as easy of a transition if it wasn't for people like that. So I have a lot of gratitude for that. NEA also was incredibly supportive in helping, making sure that I had what I needed as I moved over. And then honestly, one of the surprising things is, the world is so connected today. I think about my mom who moved from Belgium to California when, early in her life. And back in the time where you didn't really have all that, you couldn't FaceTime somebody. You couldn't get in a plane as easily as I can today and be home. I can fly home and be home in total travel time, 13 hours. Heathrow Express to the airport. You don't check a bag. You walk onto the plane, pretty with pretty good certainty. It's a 9.5, 10-hour flight. And then on the back half, you hop in an Uber and you're home in an hour. It's pretty amazing to be able to go across half the world in that short amount of time. And it's only going to, I think, get closer and more connected. But that's been great to experience. I think it's another reason also why, as I tell European founders, it might feel daunting to move to the US, but the world is incredibly connected and you can keep that connectivity if you put in the effort. One thing we were very conscious about doing, I have been at the firm for 5 years when I moved over. Philippe, who joined us, he came from a different firm. And so we were, but he had all the local experience. He'd been investing in Europe for, I think, 10 plus years by the time he joined us. So when we're helping advise companies that are opening offices in the US, we advise something similar. You have your founding team, someone who knows the culture of your company, who knows what you're looking for in a new hire. Pairing someone like that with someone who's from the market you're moving to, now neither of you are starting from square zero. If I moved here and try to do it all by myself, I'd have to build net new relationships with the entire market while building out the practice. And Philippe, if he were to do it all on his own, he'd have to learn NEA's culture and, all of our investing, committees and how do I communicate this to the firm, et cetera. But if you work together, if people feel I had the NEA culture and experience because I had been 5 years in the firm and Philippe had the Europe investing experience. And so pairing that together was much more efficient than trying to build either of those from scratch. We tell our companies the same thing. Take 1 or 2 people who are part of your core founding team, have them spend a year or 2 or maybe 10 plus years if everything works out well, opening that net new office for you, and then find someone who can be a co-leader of that firm or that office that has unique domain and geographical expertise, and then merging those together, I think, is a good way to expand. But yeah, there's a lot of things that have been surprising, but it's also been an amazing just life experience to live in a new part of the world and all the cultures that I've been able to experience and founders that we've met and friends that I've made. And I feel very lucky to have had that experience so far.
What's the one thing you miss?
Breakfast burritos. I have that's a funny answer. Obviously my family, my friends, 8 hours. Well, I say it's not that, but it can be a little bit frustrating because you wake up, everyone's asleep back at home, and then you go to your office, you're working. When they wake up, they come home from work and you're getting ready to go to bed. So it's not like it's easy to connect. I miss that a lot. I miss the beautiful sunshine and the ocean and my favorite cycling routes. But my business idea is to open up a breakfast burrito, little stand in Soho. I feel like, have you ever had a breakfast burrito, by the way?
Yes.
It's the most California food, in my opinion. And it's
the most incredible thing. You don't expect it to be incredible, but then you have it. You're like, oh, all of this is in this, and it tastes that good.
And if you make it well, because there's a handful of them here in the UK. I've tried almost all of them, and I have to tell you, they are 1 out of 10. I have a friend in the US, Mo Joma, another shout out to a good friend, and he makes the best one I've ever had. And if I could take his recipe and just open up a little, it's not that complex. You just need eggs, black beans, some salsa, avocado, cheese. Maybe if you want to put in some bacon or something, you can have that as an option. And then you just roll it up into a burrito, and it's very, you could deliver it super well. You don't need to have any sit-down areas. It's very good for takeout. It's super fast to make. So I feel like as a business, it could be really, I would invest in that. So I think I want to start one next year. But I miss that a lot about California. Yeah.
Luke, as we're wrapping up here, coming close to the top of the hour, how should UK or EU founders be thinking about the US market when they come to you to pitch? Is that something they should already have traction there? Is that something they should have a plan to? Or what are you looking for as an investor from founders regarding the US market when they come to you to pitch?
I'll say two things. First one is, we get asked a lot, when should I move my company to the US? And thinking back on one of the things we talked about earlier about there's a lot of components you have available now in Europe to build a company. I think you can build a company and have it be in Europe for the longevity of the company's life and be globally successful. What I think matters is focus on your competitive advantage. People hear about and feel the allure of Silicon Valley, and you might be a seed stage company. Let's say you're a seed stage founder from Stockholm, and you move your company to San Francisco. Now, that might be the right decision for you. If you have a network there, and if you have the ability to meet investors, the ability to meet customers, and to recruit engineers. But if you don't have a network at all in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley, just moving there, I don't think it's going to help advantage you. You're going to have to build a network from scratch. You're going to have to meet net new customers from scratch. But if you had just built your seed and Series A kind of stages of your company in Stockholm, for example, let's say you grew up in that city. Several of your friends are now, heads of product or heads of engineering or heads of finance at other companies. They can be your first customers. Or maybe some of those people that you knew in your first job can be some of your first hires. Think about your competitive advantage. And that network that you built, your early life and your early career in, is part of that competitive advantage. So get those early, easy wins. Then when it comes time to Series B, I think that's when you have to show, okay, now we have the ability to be truly global. Let's land some of those logos in the US. Let's land some of those logos in the UK and more broadly across the world. That's also where having an investor, like a firm like NEA, can be very helpful. So we love to partner with companies at the seed, Series A, and beyond. But Series A and Series B is our sweet spot because that's where I think you can really help shape a global presence. If you're going to go from, let's use the same example, Stockholm to New York to San Francisco, and you don't have a network there, having a firm like NEA that has one of the longest histories of investing in venture, one of the largest portfolios, you look at some of our exits across the history of the firm, we have touch points to so many different parts of the tech landscape and healthcare landscape that for a founder, think of us as a co-founder in that way. We can be that founding relationship for you in the US, help introduce you to net new investors, help introduce you to that head of engineering or head of sales who's going to open up your, let's say your New York office or your San Francisco office. And that's part of what we've built the last, almost 50 years now for the firm doing. And so I think that's why I think it makes sense for European companies to partner with firms like an NEA. We have the office in London. We have people on the ground here full time building with you in Europe and more broadly across the region. And then we have a team in the US who are amazing in each of their own fields. And we all work together for the best outcome for the company. And so that's how I would think about going from, whether you're in London or Stockholm or Munich or Berlin or any other city, and then ultimately expanding to the US. That tends to be a very, I think, successful playbook.
Luke, this has been really great. Thank you for making time to talk with us. I'm sure the founders listening will appreciate your insights. This has been really great. Any parting thoughts for founders that we haven't talked about? We want to squeeze in real quick before you run.
Just give us a call. I mean, I think sometimes too, I have heard people worry about, am I ready to talk to a firm like NEA? Am I ready to talk to any of the other firms that we would compete with or partner with that have similar sizes to us? And I think it's never too early. We love meeting companies when you have an idea. Maybe you haven't even left your current role yet, but we can help ideate with you. We can help, think about some of those early hires. And then we may not invest at that first stage, but for you as a founder, you get to feel for us as an investor and us as a firm. And then we can also understand your vision and your journey better. And oftentimes we might meet a company at the seed Series A and then lead the Series B, or see the pre-seed and seed and lead the Series A. But my final thought is it's never too early. So please do ping us. Philippe and I are both here in London and traveling to, many other European cities. So either drop us an email or call us on WhatsApp. I think my number is even on my LinkedIn. So please reach out. And we are always looking forward to having great conversations.
Great, Luke. This has been really great. Thank you again for making time to talk with us. Really appreciate it. And we will see you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.